and welcome back to another edition of Thoughts on what I've been watching this month. This is the May 2021 edition, and I'm going to use this video to discuss my thoughts on everything that I've been watching this month: movies, TV shows, movies old and new. And I'm also going to continue to share my thoughts on, I've been working on my 1001 movies you must see before you die challenge. Unfortunately, this month I was only able to watch 2, but I will mention those as well. So first up, I have some new films that I watched this month. First, I want to mention some movies that I watched for some other episodes of my podcast. The Empty Man, Shithouse, 2004's remake Dawn of the Dead, Army of the Dead, 2006 Babel, and 2006 Children of Men. All of those films I watched and discussed on other episodes of my podcast, so check for some other episodes for my discussion on those films if you're interested to hear my thoughts on those. All right, first up for new films, 2021 releases, we have One Night in Miami. I believe this is the feature film debut from Regina King. Regina King has primarily been an actress, and I believe she's done a lot of work in directing on TV shows. I'd have to double check though if this is her feature film debut. I wasn't sure how I was going to react to this movie once I read the concept behind it. It seemed interesting, but I was worried that I wasn't going to enjoy it. I assumed it might become kind of repetitive and maybe boring depending on how it was handled. If you're aware, the movie is basically supposed to be a fictional telling of, four of the most iconic African Americans in 1960 something, I believe, in 1964. It's basically after Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali defeats Sonny Liston. It's a fictional night. One Night in Miami, fictional night where Malcolm X, Sam Cooke, Jim Brown, and Cassius Clay all spend it together. So it sounded very interesting, but I was worried maybe the concept of it just being in one night, all in a hotel room, maybe could become boring quickly. However, it is very effective. I think this film is very well done. It did get some love at the Oscars. They keep the pace moving pretty quickly throughout the whole film. The camera, they do a good job keeping things visually interesting with the camera, even though the set is pretty simple. The characters are constantly moving. They're engaged in thought-provoking dialogue, and again, Regina King does a really great job keeping the pace quick, constantly moving along. There wasn't really any moments where I wasn't engaged with what was going on in the film. All the performances are really good. Leslie Odom Jr., who is terrific in Hamilton, really shines in this as Sam Cooke. But all four obviously are noteworthy performances trying to capture larger than life individuals. The latter half of the film was also pretty effective in its messages, themes, and ideas. The first half really kind of sets things up. It really is relevant to problems we're facing currently as a country. I'm not sure how quickly I'd go out to watch this film again. I would definitely revisit it for the sake of, a conversation. But I definitely recommend this movie, and it is currently pretty high on my 2021 list for next year. Next up, the next new film that I have from 2021 is an animated film called The Mitchells vs. the Machines. That's currently on Netflix. One Night in Miami is on Amazon Prime. I feel like there are a lot of things I could nitpick about this film. It's an animated kids movie from the same studio that did the Lego movie. Sony, I believe, Sony Animation Studio, as well as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. They did a lot of bad movies before those two films. But this movie is just a ton of fun. There's a lot of elements, again, about the story and the characters you can nitpick, but it's too much fun to care. The art direction is stunning. If you've seen Spider-Man to the Spider-Verse, they do some similar things to that film that are just breathtaking. The look of the film is incredible. There's a lot of great pop culture references, particularly with obscure movies that, for me personally, as a movie lover, was a lot of fun. The humor was a bit hit or miss. I mean, there were some moments where I literally laughed out loud, like had some really guttural laughs, and then there's some other times where the jokes just didn't really land. I enjoyed some of the dark and morbid humor, some of the visual gags, but there is, again, some kind of dumb cringe humor in this film as well. At the end of the day, it's a pretty fantastic animated film. It's great for the entire family. Adults should enjoy it too. I definitely recommend checking out The Mitchells versus the Machines. It's currently streaming on Netflix. The next film that I'm going to talk about was supposed to come out way back in 2019. It was released in film festivals in 2019. It was anticipated to have a release in the United States in 2019, and then it got pushed, and then the pandemic hit, and it got pushed again. And that is Saint Maud, that is currently streaming on Hulu. I believe that was where I watched it. It is the latest horror film released from A24. A24 has done some of my favorite horror films in recent memory. From Robert Eggers films, Ari Aster's films, as well as Robert David Mitchell, I think, is who did It Follows. I can't remember if that was A24 or not. That one might not have been. But Saint Maud is a directorial debut. A24 has been big on horror debuts by Rose Glass, written and directed by her. And it's basically about a young nurse who has kind of an interesting background. You kind of find out things later about her, but she gets hired to take care of this wealthy dancer named Amanda, who is basically suffering from cancer, I believe. And then when she runs into a former colleague, you kind of find out some dark things about her past. I was really looking forward to this movie. It got a ton of praise. A lot of critical reception was incredibly positive. And I kept getting disappointed to see the date get pushed and pushed and pushed. Finally, it came out. I've been excited to see it. I finally watched it, and I liked it. I think my anticipation for this movie was so high that I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I thought I would. It is quite a debut. If you really are like independent horror, original horror, definitely check this out. Rose Glass, whatever Rose does next, I will definitely watch. Great atmosphere, very purposeful camera work, some really frightening imagery in this movie, chilling imagery, and an absolutely shocking ending. The ending is just very disturbing. However, I just could not invest in this movie. I struggled to really care much about it. Part of the problem is the length. This movie is less than 80 minutes when the credits roll. It's very short, which leaves you very little time to kind of explore the characters and the themes and the ideas being presented in this film. It just seems way too brief for me to really invest and dig into what's going on. What is there, I enjoyed. I wanted some more visual exploration, some more time for things to breathe and sink in terms of the material and the story. Really wanted to love this movie. There's a lot to enjoy. I think it's worth checking out. It'll probably be low on my 2021 list. It'll be on there for sure. And I see why people are loving it. Maybe I'll enjoy it more on a future rewatch. Saint Maud, again, I believe it's on Hulu. I enjoyed it, but didn't love it quite as much as I thought I would. The next new film from 2021 that I watched is on HBO Max. It's Taylor Sheridan's latest film, Those Who Wish Me Dead. If you don't know who Taylor Sheridan is, he got his start as an actor, and now in his 40s and 50s, he is writing and directing films. Very good movies. Sicario, he wrote. One of my favorite films from 2014, 2015. Hell or High Water, one of my favorite films from 2016, he wrote. Wind River, his self-appointed directorial debut from 2017, he wrote and directed. Loved Wind River. I thought it was really, really great. This is his worst film, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. He has set the bar for himself pretty high with all three of those films. I thought all three of those movies were some of the best movies that came out in the years they were released. And this movie is certainly entertaining, but it seems to be missing some of the elements that made me love those movies. For one, the characters are not nearly as well developed in this film. We don't really spend a ton of time with any one of them. There's like 3 to 4 groups of characters you sporadically they cut to throughout the film. The dialogue is not nearly as engaging as the other films that he's written. It's kind of boring dialogue and really just boring average characters played by famous actors. The combination of uninteresting characters and dialogue really just kept me from investing in this film. I just really didn't care about anything going on because the dialogue and the characters were like, ugh, okay. The action, was solid, but again, I just wasn't really emotionally invested in anything going on. I feel like his other films, I was so wrapped up in the characters that I was on the edge of my seat with excitement during all the action all the action sequences. Much of the filmmaking qualities in this film were fine. Visuals, technical aspects, entertaining, mostly serviceable, nothing special. I think part of the biggest reason this film is not nearly as good as Sicario and Hell or High Water is he didn't direct those two films. Sicario was directed by Denis Villeneuve, who's an extraordinary director. Hell or High Water was directed by, I think, something Mackenzie, David Mackenzie or something like that, who's a solid director, but that film is elevated by the fact that it's very, the focus is very narrow, really good script. He directed Wind River, which he wrote, and that film is pretty well directed, I thought. I haven't watched in a while, but I remember really enjoying it. So I don't know if it was like the excessive use of CGI, the lack of focus on some of the characters, and the other things I was mentioning. It's okay. It's a very average to slightly above average movie. It's on HBO Max. If you're looking for something to kind of keep you entertained for an hour and a half plus, check it out, I guess. Those who wish me dead. The next film that I want to talk about that's from 2021 that I watched that's streaming on Netflix, science fiction thriller, psychological thriller, from Alexandre Aja, French filmmaker. This is a French movie, starring Melanie Laurent, and oh my gosh, I don't know how to say the other French actor's name. His last name is Almaric. They're in a lot of great movies. I like this movie a lot. It's on Netflix. It doesn't really do anything groundbreaking for the sci-fi thriller genre in terms of narrative, but its presentation, its themes, and its pacing, and the twists and turns that happen during the runtime are all great. I was really impressed with how the film continuously found ways to make things visually interesting, even though essentially for the majority of the film, the main character, the protagonist, is stuck in a cryogenic chamber. You're just in a box with her, and she's trying to figure out why. She wakes up and doesn't know why, and that's basically the setup of the movie. And quite a bit of the movie, that's where she is, and that's where you are with her. But they find a way to make things very visually interesting, constantly keeping the pace moving. Great use of sound and music and special effects. The performances, pretty much the only main performances in this movie are Melanie Laurent, who's the main character stuck in the box, and then the AI system she is communicating with in the box is voiced. His last name is Almaric Matthew, maybe. I don't know. He's a French actor. I've seen him in other things, but he's really good. I've seen some of Aja. I think that's how you say him. Aja. Alexandre. I've seen some of his other films, High Tension, the remake of Hills Have Eyes. I saw him a long time ago, wasn't huge on them, but I really like this movie, so I might check out some more of his films. Film is very heavy in existentialism, really resonated with me. Interesting science fiction concepts. Definitely will rewatch this film. I'm not sure how it's going to hold up on rewatch once you kind of know the big twist, some of the reveals that happen. Once you know it, I don't really know how heavy I will be on this on rewatch. But Oxygen on Netflix, really, really great. The last new film I watched from a 2021 release, I rented on Amazon for $20 because it's currently in theaters, and you can rent them for the premiere access, very expensive. And I showed it as a movie night at my house for some family. Bob Odenkirk's new movie, Nobody, doesn't really do anything new in terms of its genre. It's basically the first John Wick film. It is almost beat for beat, with some of the main details changed, but the general narrative is the first John Wick movie. In fact, it's written and produced by the same two guys who wrote, produced, directed, and are the heavy, creators and driving forces behind the John Wick movies. Those two aforementioned gentlemen, they teamed up with the director from Hardcore Henry. He directs this film. I really liked Hardcore Henry from 2015, really underrated movie. This movie is incredibly entertaining. So, even though the script is super derivative, it's not really that interesting. It doesn't matter. Bob Odenkirk, Christopher Lloyd plays his dad, RZA plays his half-brother. They're all fantastic. There's some other minor characters that help elevate the kind of trope-heavy narrative and the by-the-numbers script. Even though they're not really that interesting, their performances make it more interesting. The action is insane. It's just as good as anything that Leitch and Kolstad, I don't know, I think that's how you say their last names, did the John Wick films. Anything they've done in those movies, it's just as good here. The action is brutal. It's well choreographed. It's very creative. It's very entertaining. Long takes with all the action in frame with very little cuts. Very impressive what Bob Odenkirk did for this film. The director, it's a Russian name. He's from Russia. I don't really know how to say his name, but his attention to detail with the editing, the camera work, the use of music is great in this movie. It's all very purposeful, adds to the film's visual storytelling, overall entertainment. It's great. At the end of the day, I could nitpick. There's a lot of questions, kind of like the first John Wick movie. I wonder if they'll have sequels to this because there's a lot of questions that you have by the end. And there's some moments that kind of build and happen with very little explanation. But again, the movie doesn't take itself too seriously. It's just a lot of fun. Just sit back with a big group of friends for this one. Have a great time. Nobody currently in theaters. Again, I rented it for an expensive price on Amazon because I really want to see it. It's great. Next, I want to talk about a couple TV shows I'm watching. Currently rewatching The Sopranos. I think I mentioned this last month. It's great. Haven't been able to watch a lot of other shows because I've been focused on rewatching The Sopranos for the new movie coming out. Still watching Deadwood as I was last month. I'm kind of finally starting to get into it in season 2. I wasn't huge on season 1. I was really disappointed because I thought I was going to love the show, but I'm into season 2. I'll let you guys know once I finish it what I feel about it. A show that I watched, a miniseries that I watched that a lot of people are enjoying that I was super disappointed with, and I thought was super average, was The Falcon and the Winter Soldier on Disney Plus, continuing Marvel's TV series, limited series, miniseries that they're doing. I don't know if I'm going to continue watching these, to be honest with you. I think this is one of the worst things Marvel has done. I think it's one of their worst projects overall. I don't know why people are enjoying this. I think it's pandering. I think it's lazy. I think it's obvious. It's boring. I just don't know if people are unwilling to criticize Marvel at this point for their projects. WandaVision, I thought was okay. I thought at least that one was creative and decently written. But this one, I was rolling my eyes, laughing at moments that were not supposed to be funny. I was cringing. I was bored. I struggled to get through this, and it's only really like 4 hours. It's 6 episodes, 4 total hours. The biggest problem with the premise of this show is it isn't really that interesting to begin with. You have the Falcon, who is never given much story in the MCU, and they don't even give you that much more characterization here. The Winter Soldier was a villain who was never really explored that much in the MCU after he was rehabilitated by the Wakandans. He was more interesting when he was tethered to Steve Rogers, and now he's gone. Obviously, they explore some interesting things with Barnes that he's been dealing with, but I think it's done lazy. It's done poorly. It's not explored very long. To me, the most interesting ideas in the show are not explored well, or they aren't explored for very long in order to make room for villains who are cliche, doing cliche things, cliche dialogue. I mean, the villains are so boring. Why did they even need them? I mean, they could have cut the villains out of this completely and expanded more on the ideas with Isaiah Bradley. I thought his character was one of the most interesting characters in the show, and they barely show him. Focusing on what Barnes is going through mentally, the ideas around John Walker. I mean, I think that's more of your 3+ hour movie instead of the 4.5 to 5 hours where there's so much added on that's so boring with these villains and some of the plot that revolves around them. I mean, there's a lot of great ideas here. Don't get me wrong. I love the idea of exploring race and racism in the MCU, but I thought it was embarrassing how they explored it. I thought it was pandering. I thought it was obvious. It was lazy. It was uninteresting. I'm kind of stunned people are praising this so much. There's some really bad visual effects in this, some of the worst I've seen in a while. It's clear that they skimped on the budget for this project. Aside from the final episode, which is really dark, so I think they used it to hide some of the poor special effects. I don't know, guys. At this point, unless someone I really trust recommends one of these Marvel shows, I'm probably done. I think I'm done with these shows. Maybe I'll watch some of the movies. I'm really looking forward to Guardians 3, but these shows are this is bad. I don't think it's good. I don't know what people see in it. All right, with that, I'm going to move on to some movies that I enjoyed a little bit more. I'm going to talk about some old movies now to wrap things up. So some old films that I rewatched this month or saw for the first time. The first one is Psycho from 1960. Alfred Hitchcock. Rewatched it to show students in my film studies class. It's a classic. If you haven't seen Psycho by now, it's one of the greatest horror films ever made. Really helped jumpstart the slasher franchise. For my film club that I run at Grand Ledge High School, I rewatched with my students Hot Fuzz, one of Edgar Wright's most famous films. Really great parody of the buddy cop genre set in England. Love that movie. If you've never seen Hot Fuzz, absolutely got to check it out, from 2007. For my film studies class, I then showed Seven from 1995. It was a rewatch, another iconic horror film, this time from the 90s, kind of really helped set the standards for the serial killer genre in terms of gritty cop films as well. More of a neo-noir crime thriller horror film. Really great if you've never seen Seven with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. Next, I watched a movie I'd never seen before, and I don't really want to talk about it long because it is devastating. I watched the documentary Dear Zachary from 2008. I don't know if I can recommend this. It's one of the greatest documentaries I've ever seen, and one that I don't know if I'll ever watch again. If you're looking for something Really well done, but also one of the saddest things you might ever see in your life. Check it out. I was almost in tears. I was in tears at the end of this, especially because it has to do with kids, and I have 2 kids. So I don't even really want to talk about it because I'm going to start crying again. It's an incredible documentary, but just absolutely devastating. Will sink you to the floor and have you on your knees crying. It is one of the saddest things I've ever seen. That's all I want to say about it. 2008, Dear Zachary. The next film I watched was from 2009. I watched on Hulu. Never had seen it before. Pandorum. I had been wanting to watch this film for years because it had bad reviews, but the premise sounds so interesting. And I've always been concerned about the bad reviews, but I should have never listened to them. I mean, there's some bad dialogue and some silly logic, but this movie is a lot of fun. I don't understand why the reviews are as bad as they are. Yeah, it's not like a masterpiece or anything, but the movie's pretty incredible considering the low budget. It looks great for the $30 to $40 million range. I mean, that's a pretty moderate budget for what they show in this movie. I love the set design, atmosphere, concepts, and the themes in this. Probably the closest thing we'd ever get to a Dead Space film. Pandorum, science fiction horror film set in deep space. A lot of fun. Go in blind if you've never seen Pandorum. I had a lot of fun with it. It's great. Then the next film that I watched, old film, I rewatched Monty Python, The Holy Grail, and this is Spinal Tap. Monty Python from 1975 is on Netflix. This is Spinal Tap from 1984 is on HBO Max. Both of them are iconic films in their respective genre, satire, comedy films. Rewatched them for my film studies class to show my students. Great films. They're iconic. I love them both for exactly what they're going for. I think they're both great. Next, I was trying to rewatch the Saw franchise. I got through Saw and Saw 2, Saw from 2004, Saw 2 from 2005. The entire franchise pretty much is on HBO Max. I own Saw on Blu-ray. The original Saw is incredible. I think the original Saw film is a groundbreaking film, for what it's going for. I hadn't watched it in a while. I saw it when I was like 13 or 14, around the time it came out. This film, the original Saw, and this franchise really helped jumpstart my love for horror films. There's some bad acting in the original Saw, particularly from Lee Winnell, who plays Adam, who wrote the film as well. He's a great writer and director, has made a lot of great films since doing this. The film is very clearly influenced by Seven. But what they do on the budget, I mean, they had less than $2 million to make this film. It's very effective, very entertaining, very impressive for the budget. I think James Wan and Lee Winnell, first-time filmmakers, got to take that into account too. Really impressed with what they did. Unfortunately, most of the films that come after this are pretty bad. Saw 2, I enjoy. The acting is just so bad in Saw 2. Saw 2 is where the logic completely starts to go out the window. You really start to question everything about this franchise, but Saw 2 is still quite a bit of fun. I enjoyed rewatching. I hadn't seen in a while. The last 2 old films I saw from this month, rewatches, Shaun of the Dead from 2004. Also showed that, screened it in my film club at the high school. Another iconic parody comedy horror film. From Edgar Wright, 2004, starts his Cornetto trilogy off. I adore Shaun of the Dead. And then lastly, Jaws from 1975. Rewatched that for my film studies class. If you've never seen Jaws, iconic film. Jaws is just absolutely iconic. Started the trend for blockbuster movies. All right, lastly, the last 2 things I want to talk about are the 2 films that I got to watch to continue my 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die challenge. Watching every movie in that book over the course of however many years it takes me. So I watched the next film, I believe the 5th film in the book, Intolerance. Intolerance came out in 1916. I'm trying to find it here on my list. Yep, came out in 1916 from D.W. Griffith, who did The Birth of a Nation. This film is often incorrectly assumed to be an apology by D.W. Griffith for The Birth of a Nation. It is not. It's simply a response to critics. It's an impressive movie. D.W. Griffith was a piece of shit scumbag. I mean, he made one of the most racist movies of all time. The Birth of a Nation is an incredibly made film, but it's racist as hell. It's hard to watch. Intolerance is what, if you can ignore D.W. Griffith being a scumbag, Intolerance is a pretty impressive movie. I was shocked how good this was. I mean, it's don't expect it to be like a modern film, but for what it is, you got to be in awe of this film's accomplishments. I don't feel like I've ever seen a movie like this before. I think everyone should watch this at least once, especially passionate cinema fans. I look forward to watching it again. When you consider it came out in 1916 and thousands of movies have been released since that time, I just feel like there's not many movies that have ever tried to replicate anything like what this movie did. Which probably explains why it was not financially successful. As expensive as it was, its scope and scale, it's a massive project with sprawling, almost avant-garde approach to storytelling. It just seems way ahead of its time, and I feel like no one could even attempt what this movie did in terms of it basically being a blockbuster in its scope and scale and sets and extras, but also being like an artsy film and how it presents its narrative. I mean, this movie didn't make much money. The only person I can think of who tries movies like this is maybe Terrence Malick. I mean, even his movies aren't quite as expensive as this movie would be with inflation, but he does try these big, high concept movies that are like blockbuster films, kind of wanting to be, but also avant-garde artsy films. I watched the silent film historian on the Blu-ray extras for this film talk about how no one has really attempted to do anything like this movie since. And you can see why. I mean, it's a tremendous piece of filmmaking. It's worth the watch for anyone interested in silent films or film history. Intolerance or Love Struggle Throughout the Ages. You can watch it for free on YouTube. It's in the public domain. I ordered from Kino Lorber, I ordered the Blu-ray so I get some special features with it and have the home media release. It's an incredible film. Not as long as Birth of a Nation. It's like 2 hours and 40 minutes instead of 3.5, but still pretty long. I enjoyed it quite a bit. The next film, I believe the sixth film in the book that I watched, that I was able to watch, was a rewatch. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920, German expressionism horror film, often considered one of the first horror films ever made. This film's only 77 minutes, very, very short, worth your time. Again, anyone who is into film history, horror films, got to see The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I've always been fascinated by silent films, and so movies like this, you got to watch in a vacuum. And you try to imagine what audiences would have felt seeing a movie like this 100 years ago. But even now, I find this film to be so entertaining visually. It's such an interesting and weird movie. Of the few silent films I have seen, this is one of the most bizarre in its presentation. You got to appreciate German expressionism for its sheer weirdness. There's a really iconic twist ending at the end of this movie that I love. I think it's great and rewards subsequent viewings. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, got to see this movie if you've never seen it before. It's absolutely incredible. I think it's also probably available on YouTube because it's over 100 years old, should be in the public domain, should be able to get it on YouTube. Most silent films from the teens, the 20s, and the 30s you can find on YouTube. Well, 30s, you wouldn't probably find. You could find old films from the 30s, but they're, silent films are pretty much done into the 1930s. There weren't as many silent films being made because sound had been invented in 1927, late 1920s. Anyway, those are the next two films I'm watching. I'm hoping to watch more of 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die in June. That was pretty much everything I got to see in May. Hopefully you enjoyed my comments and thoughts on some of those movies. And I'll be back at the end of June to talk about everything I watched in the month of June. I just put out an episode talking about Children of Men with three of my good buddies for my Classics We're Embarrassed We Haven't Seen series. They had not seen that film, and so we just talked about that. Hope you enjoy listening to that. I also just talked about The Army of the Dead on my series of podcasts here with a couple more friends from the new film from Zack Snyder on Netflix. I will be coming soon with more episodes, talking about more movies, hoping to do a episode on the Conjuring films with The Conjuring 3 coming out. And I'm also going to start a new series on the Lord of the Rings with the TV show coming out later this year. I want to talk about every Lord of the Rings property. So look forward to that. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed listening. I'm Vince, Film Nerd Podcast. Until next time, go watch the movies.